All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today, and welcome to our webinar, Embedding Resilience into Your Climate Action Plan. So just a couple logistics before we jump into the content. The program is being recorded. We will upload it to YouTube once we complete the webinar, and it will be sent out next week or by the end of the week. If you are feeling friendly today, please introduce yourself in the chat and say hello to each other, just with your name and institution. And then if you have questions, we should have about 15 minutes at the end for those. You can add them in the Q&A function, or you're also welcome to put those in the chat. So this is webinar 7 of a 12-part series around climate action planning. If you're interested in the past or the first 6 webinars, those are on our YouTube channel, and we have 5 more coming that will be taking place before we have our Higher Ed Climate Summit, which will be happening in February of 2025 in Washington, D.C. We have registration open right now, and that will be originally early bird registration was closing this Friday, but we are going to be extending that to, I believe, December 18th. So that early bird pricing will be extended through then as well. And if you're interested to learn a little bit more about the summit, you're welcome to go to the website higheredclimatesummit.org. Before, again, we go into the content a little bit more, we have a couple working groups that we wanted to let you guys know about. So first we have our Intersectional Climate Action Leaders Working Group. This working group is a BIPOC affinity space meant for members of the Climate Leadership Network as well as non-members. And it's intended for HBCU, MSI, and tribal college climate action stakeholders, community, NGO, and corporate partners. And if you're interested in that, you're welcome to scan this QR code or email our colleague Blythe, whose email is listed here. We also have our IRA Community of Practice, which I believe jump-started today. And so if you're interested in this, you're welcome to scan the QR code. And if you need any more information, I believe you're welcome to DM me, and I can connect you with our colleagues that are in charge of that. So before I hand it off to the panelists, we really wanted to get an idea of who's in the room. And so we have just a really small poll for where everybody is in terms of their role, but also where they are in their resilience planning. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this, and we'll just keep it open for a couple minutes just so we can learn a little bit more about who's in the room. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And just so everybody else knows who is here, it looks like most of the people that are here are from our sustainability staff that are from facilities and operations, a couple faculty, some folks from upper administration, and then people from other entities. The second question is, what is your relationship to your municipality? 20% or 7 folks said they don't have one. About 25% said they have one, but not related to climate. About 25% also said they have one and are planning on working together around resilience planning. And then the rest of the folks are in the other category. And then lastly, we have where are you in your resilience planning. So about half of you are in the beginning, a quarter in the middle. A couple of you have completed, one is updating, and then 5 of you have no clue, which is completely okay. We included that intentionally. So great. Well, thanks for filling that out. Just so again, we know a little bit more about you all and where you're coming from. So, all right. So we will move on. Okay, so our 2 panelists today are Dr. Adam Welchel and Kate M. Nelson. And Adam is the Director of Science at the Nature Conservancy, and Kate is the Director of Campus Sustainability at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. So I'm going to introduce Adam. And so Dr. Adam Welchel's 32-year career and leadership position has catalyzed partnerships with strategic direction, while with government agencies, private firms, academic institutions, and nonprofits in the US, China, Europe, Southeast Asia, Caribbean, and Africa. Adam Welchel is an author, facilitator, and dynamic communicator called upon to assist diverse groups from around the world with team building, strategic planning, and community building. Recently, Adam served as the key facilitator on the Puerto Rico Climate Adaptation Plan and as a lead author for the 3rd U.S. National Climate Assessment. In addition, Adam is the founder of Community Resilience Building, which has helped over 500 municipalities and academic institutions across 14 states to date. Adam also co-founded both the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program in Massachusetts and the Municipal Resilience Program in Rhode Island. Happy to have you, Adam, and take it away.
Thank you so much. How embarrassing. Oh, thank you so much, Cameron. I really appreciate that. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to be talking a little bit about campus and community resilience building, and then focusing in on a couple campus and community resilience examples. And I'm thrilled to be talking with folks that are categorizing themselves as beginner or have no clue. That's pretty much how I try to spend my days, is in that beginner have no clue category, always looking for surprises and different paths forward. Next slide, please. Just some quick definitions just to kind of frame up our hour together. Here's a definition of community resilience. It's that immediate and sustained ability of communities to withstand, adapt to, and recover from adversity. And I've tacked on and build upon strengths. I find that strengths are usually a underrepresented and under-focused component of this thing we call community resilience. So I'll be honing in on that during our time together. Community sustainability, this is something that many of you live with every day, often refers to communities planned, built, or modified to promote sustainable living. And then finally, equitable communities, when all people have the opportunity, resources, and tools needed to achieve their potential, to lead healthy and fulfilled lives with rewarding work, and to assess, experience, and participate in all areas the area has to offer, while ensuring others can do the same. A definition coming from Buffalo Niagara. So these are 3 kind of components of this whole thing as we talk about resilience and sustainability. and equity. Those are three sisters in my mind that live in the same house, and they often come into play, whether you're focused on resilience, whether you're focused on sustainability or equity. It always seems to lead in one of these three paths, and they always seem to converge at some point. Next slide. As we think about the why around community resilience building, I think we're all living with this, these shared concerns and challenges within and across campuses, the implication for faculty, staff, students, and residents in the adjoining municipality, learning continuity and financial growth, services, amenity, equity and diversity, quality of health, life on campus, and the environment on campus and the adjoining municipality. These are all shared concerns that really speak to the why of doing resilience or climate action planning. And of course, there are some shared opportunities as well. Next slide, please. And they often fall in these buckets. I'm a big fan of the resilient commitment with second nature. So, this provides you with an opportunity to fulfill that through the practice of entertaining and embedding resilience in your climate action planning on campus, not just mitigation, but also adaptation. You run the risk of strengthening community via collaborative dialogue, which is not really a risk, but a reward. Identify, prioritize meaningful actions for your campus or campuses. Enhance safety for students, faculty, staff, and facilities. And finally, establish your campus as a leader in this critical and emerging space. Next slide. So that's a little bit about the what and the why, and we'll dive deeper into that, I'm sure, as we go through our hour together. But thinking about the beginners and the have no clue folks, such as myself, how do we get started, and where does my community begin? I want to hone in on those questions now. Next slide, please. One key way is to be obviously working with Cami and the great team at Second Nature and honing in on this climate leadership commitments, both the mitigation and the resilient commitment. Next slide. And as you begin that conversation or continue that conversation with Second Nature, there is a path for those looking to get in. How do I start? There's a well laid out path to get to that resilient commitment, which includes organizing, assessing, planning, measuring progress, and reviewing over time. So there is a path here through the resilient commitment with Second Nature, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a second. Next slide. And of course, there is a well-connected network of folks just like yourselves across the United States in academic institutions looking to embrace this climate commitment and in particular the resilient commitment. So you are not alone and there is a path forward. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about community resilience building as a possible approach or tool that you can use in order to satisfy your resilient commitment or just go ahead and pick it up and use it to advance resilience in your climate action plan on your campus. It's called Community Resilience Building, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. There's a website there where you can reinforce anything I speak about today. And again, this community resilience building process really is designed to help academic institutions that have signed up for the resilient commitment with Second Nature satisfy those two pieces in the middle, the assess and plan, and really use the community resilience building process to advance these really key steps and begin your journey on resilience on your campus. This community resilience process has been tried, tested, and trusted by over 500 communities across 14 states since we put it together back in 2010 or so. It is very much an anywhere at any scale approach. It can be used on large, small campuses, urban, rural, public, private, 4-year, 2-year, you name it. It is particularly well suited to not only provide the direction and the path for your campus, but also to help enable partners in the adjoining geographies and the surrounding municipalities and regions to be integrated into the planning process so you're benefiting from that expertise and that knowledge and that larger network. It is a community-driven process, somewhat unique in the sense that it provides a workbench or a fulcrum through which you can entertain resilience, but as I mentioned at the beginning, also sustainability, equity, safety, and health. So it's a great way to merge all the components that are necessary for a comprehensive assessment and planning for resilience on your campus. We've had a lot of folks. I know I saw Cal State, Humboldt, Morgan King. I saw you log in. What a shining example of somebody who picked up all the information and stuff off the website and took it to their campus and went for it and made a difference there. You can see some of the other campuses that have gone through this. I'm going to hone in on Tufts University and Eastern Connecticut State University in a moment with some examples. The general objectives of whatever process you use to move forward on your path to resilience should at least look to address hazards and assets comprehensively. What is it that's of concern both today and tomorrow, be it heat, be it water, flooding, you name it. It should address hazards and assets comprehensively. It should work to surface strengths as well as vulnerabilities. And again, underscoring strengths, I think that is often left off the table in many times, but there are many things that you're already doing on your campus that should be amplified and reinforced longer term as a strength. The third objective typically should be define and prioritize a list of actions, and these actions should be designed to reinforce your strengths and reduce vulnerabilities. And sometimes you can find those actions that do both at the same time. Also, using this objective steps here, you also use that to identify commonalities and opportunities, not just within and across your campus, but also potentially, if appropriate, with your encompassing municipalities and then your counties and potentially larger regions. So these are typical objectives as you start about beginning your process or potentially refreshing your process if you hadn't tackled some of these objectives. The process within the community resilience building workshop guidebook is also a good one to think about whether you use this process or not. The preparation for the workshop, establishing a core team with goals, thinking about who your community is and engaging stakeholders. As I mentioned, working through characterizing your hazards, identifying community vulnerabilities and strengths, identifying and prioritize community actions, and then finally determine the overall priority actions, pulling it together and then moving forward. And be thinking about your community in at least three planning buckets, this idea of infrastructure, societal, and environment. It's all about the people. It always has been. It always will be. Beginning to end, it's all about your community and making sure you're providing that opportunity for them to have input and contribute as much as they are willing. You can find out more about this particular process on this website here. And finally, I'd like just to touch on a couple of examples to give you maybe an idea of what the end game of a planning process has been for a few campuses. Next slide. Again, Eastern Connecticut State University, who partnered up with their municipality, the town of Windham, and then Tufts University, the main campus. I'll start with Eastern Connecticut State University. So this is a campus. It's about 5,500 students. Top hazards they identified included flooding, extreme storms, heat and drought. A lot of strengths in their leadership and staff and emergency management, and a real strong NGO community in the surrounding municipality. They had some big issues with stormwater management, road network, emergency management capability, and public health, safety, and floodplains. That's kind of defined who they were in terms of top hazard strengths and vulnerabilities. And the priority actions they identified were, next slide. There you go. Again, this is back in 2017. Strengthen communication channels, handle large-scale infectious disease outbreaks, in both the campus, town, and region pre-COVID, installation of green infrastructure, catalog and integrate existing alternative energy systems, and update lists of homebound citizens and disabled faculty, students, and staff. So you can see it's quite broad reaching when you bring a community together and ask them questions about strengths, vulnerabilities, and priority actions, and also the commingling of sustainability, resilience, and equity all mixed together in these priorities. Next slide. And Tufts University, the wonderful University of Tufts, just outside of Boston, about 11,000 students. They had extreme heat, extreme precipitation, hurricanes, infectious disease, quite similar strengths as Eastern Connecticut, perhaps with the addition of a cogen plant. But they also had a real strong partnership with municipalities. The campus actually straddles two municipalities, Medford and Somerville. So a little bit of complexity there, but you know, it's if it's not worth, it's all good stuff. And they had a number of vulnerabilities, including food systems and stormwater drainage and student housing and well-being. Probably a lot of resonating with a lot of you in your particular situations on your campus. Next slide, please. And this is what they came up with after a community resilience building process in terms of their priority, focusing in on human welfare for faculty, staff, and students, long-term forestry and landscaping master plan for their campus, inventory of surfaces, green stormwater infrastructure, the idea of depaving opportunities, which was pretty interesting, sheltering of residents from surrounding communities. This was a bit of a progressive type of priority where they were really interested in making their campus boundaries a little bit more permeable and more receptive to the adjoining neighborhoods around campus. Research projects that require power, a real big deal, making sure there's continuity of power for research. And then finally, annual preparedness drills for infectious disease. And again, this was pre-COVID. So again, sort of a commingling of resilience and sustainability and public health and mitigation and all those kind of good things that tend to get perhaps unexpectedly at the onset of a planning process around resilience, but necessary in terms of being comprehensive for both your campus as well as potentially entertaining a partnership with your municipalities. Next slide, please. I just want to mention that we do have an opportunity for a few campuses. We're working with Wake Forest University and Georgia Tech right now, but through a partnership between Second Nature and the Nature Conservancy, we're anticipating the opportunity to work with a few more campuses that have signed up for the Resilient Commitment down the road. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll just say thank you. Here's my email if you want to reach out to me, and I'll turn it back to you, Cami.
Thanks, Adam. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Kate. So Kate M. Nelson comes to the University of Minnesota from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she was the first director of sustainability in the UW system, completing a 15-year tenure, launching and serving in that role. She recently led UWM stakeholder engaged and endorsed climate action, carbon and resiliency plan creation and implementation. While climate action planning is a highlight, Kate's experience is vastly comprehensive and includes aligning sustainability to university goals to include energy savings, stormwater management, transportation planning, and resource management overhauls. Kate describes the real pride of her work as connecting sustainability initiatives to deep equity work and student need. Her previous research in the sustainable development of Costa Rica, Romania, and Cuba has influenced and aligned her strategies for environmental policy and strategy. Kate holds an MS in Conservation Biology and Sustainable Development from the Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies of UW-Madison, as well as a BA in Conservation and Environmental Science from UW-Milwaukee, and a previous BA in Theater and Writing from Cardinal Stritch University. Kate joined the UMN office in 2023. Take it away, Kate.
Awesome. Thanks. So happy to be here. And I can't tell you how glad I am I get to present with Adam because he had such a huge influence on the work that I've done. So I've been working on resilience planning for about the last 7 years at these two institutions, and I thought it would be great to share with you two different examples, and particularly when a lot of my sustainability work has turned towards resiliency. I've learned a lot and I've adapted a lot and I've sifted through like, how do you do this and what resources are the best? And I will have to say, if I didn't have the community resilience building workshop to start from, I think I would have been far more lost. So I give a lot of credit to what Adam and the Nature Conservancy have put together. It has really helped us work. And so I am going to focus particularly on the topic at hand as to incorporating resilience planning into the climate action plan as a whole. And there's so many other topics with resilience, so I'm happy to take questions, but this is where I'm going to focus. Next. And so just to be clear, and my slides are going to look like this a lot. So from UW-Milwaukee, where I started with this in 2017, we were fully signed on to the climate commitment, which is resilience and carbon, I think around 2014. It's funny how you start to forget these things. And then here at the University of Minnesota, we, as the commitment evolved, it stands as a carbon commitment, although by taking the next steps, we will be able to fully fill in the resilience commitment as well, which I'll explain in a second. Next slide. And so this is what I think this is the most defining piece of the difference. So when I was at UW-Milwaukee, I had the very special privilege to be a part of the community resilience building workshop for our region, for Southeastern Wisconsin, very much in context of a Great Lake community. And it was actually our sewage district, Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, that was doing the regional planning. And that really helped me better understand the work. And when I was able to, with my colleague at UW-Milwaukee, launch our full climate action plan, which we did, you heard it said, we've referred to it as a carbon and resilience plan. It really helped tease out what we were doing at any turn. We then looked at what the region needed and also saw very much how the university is a response and a strength to resilience in a community for many reasons. Whereas here I came on right as the climate action planning was getting going at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And there was hardly even opportunity to make sure the broad base of our campus community was involved. And so there was not the opportunity to bring in the larger region or the cities, which were part of multiple communities with 3 campuses at the University of Minnesota here. And so very much changed the dynamic. So now I feel like I've always will say, like, it was better to be a part of the community part first because it really informed us. But now it's still sort of an internal struggle for me that now I want to align resilience plans all around St. Paul and Minneapolis and the regions. And that is part of my next step. Next slide. So in thinking about when you're getting ready to launch a climate action plan that includes resilience, I wanted you to see some timelines and the importance of what you're going to need to do. I'm really glad, again, to follow Adam because he really gave you a good sense of some things I'm going to be repeating here. You need to really dig in and do a vulnerability assessment. It's like doing your first greenhouse gas inventory. Do you remember that? Like digging through dusty bins back in 2008 or 10 or whenever. And you're not going to have that on hand. So if you think, I'm starting with a greenhouse gas inventory, but I don't have a vulnerability assessment, you need to create space and time for that. It is so incredibly valuable. And it will really help build the knowledge base of a collective stakeholders on your campus that are moving forward with the planning. And so here at the University of Minnesota, when we were launching and doing the mitigation planning, because this was our second climate action plan, actually, that's when the vulnerability assessment was taking place. So that first piece of mitigation went to the Board of Regents without the full climate resilience plan, and that allowed us more of the year to actually do the climate resilience plan. That also went to the Board of Regents. And if you look down below for UW-Milwaukee, look at that section on the right, mitigation adaptation planning. I think that's a good representation as to how small the actual planning process is compared to all the things you need to set up, which I will go into in a second. Next slide. And so just briefly, understanding our work groups, we did not have a consultant for either of these plans, only a little bit on the energy side at the University of Minnesota. We had JLL helping a little bit with the energy piece, but there was no consultant leading this. This was fully internal. These were rolled out at the same time for both universities. In terms of University of Minnesota and mitigation, you can see how we broke that out. There was a work group comprised of faculty, staff, and students for each, as well as a little bit differently in terms of adaptation. We had certain stakeholders for each area, but I very often pulled them apart and brought them back together. This was very necessary because we ended with a plan that very much understood the overlap between them. And then on the UW-Milwaukee side, we had other categories. We actually teased out far more research and curriculum initially that would respond to the climate action, as well as understanding how our community partners were going to also be a part of building out the plan. Next slide. And so this is where I really want to reflect, because this was my moment of, wait a minute, this isn't quite working. Here I'd done the community resilience building workshop with a larger region. I was actually a core team member, so I got a good handle on it. But in both instances, in both universities, you really have to know the local science. You have to dig in. And I understand, maybe the landscape is changing, but that can be pretty challenging sometimes to get your hands on the local information. And identifying those climate hazards is critical. You would think going from Milwaukee to Minneapolis, oh, it's pretty much the same, but guess what? It's not. So I'm really happy to have MCAP here, that we were able to dig the science so that we were responding to science, just as you are doing in the mitigation with science-based targets. Then, as Adam explained, thinking about your community, your environment, and your infrastructure, you start having a conversation around what are your assets. And this is a term that I find really difficult across these different categories, but you're going to run into a critical assets conversation that your campus may or may not have had. You don't like referring to people as assets. That just gets weird. And I will say my major point here in the University of Minnesota was stopping and saying we need more of the campus community represented, which I can explain further. But then it started at UWM where I said, wait a minute, something is just not flowing for me. I need to better understand and research the existing conditions. So like things like your facility conditions assessment, what are your numbers and understanding of food insecurity on campus? What's your number of Pell Grant students? I often say, like, we were all in the pandemic, but some of us were on a yacht and some of us were on a log. And so this is where I injected my own take on the community resilience building, was to really go to the institutional knowledge and the data at hand to pull together what those conditions were. And then having at the same time a strengths reflection as to how you balance out those where the condition is worse off. And ultimately, it has to come to some kind of prioritization. I think it was much more natural at UWM. I'd been there 15 years and so forth. So our catalytic projects really came out of our priorities. But at the University of Minnesota, I dug even deeper and learned and pushed it further. Next slide. So I really wanted to, it's a large institution, 54,000 students, 280 buildings. How am I going to get a sense of the condition and make sure I have the right stakeholders that are preparing things for this conversation? So I did an offline summary of resources and conversations that amounted to what our conditions were for all of these assets. And then I came up with a rating. 1 is excellent, 2 neutral, 3 need repair, and 4 critical. Next slide, and this will all make sense. So then you add on understanding, you bring forward that science of precipitation, temperature, and storms, and think about the asset. Let's say emergency power, for example. Is the threat minor, moderate, or major? And it's going to be different on every campus based on your protocols and what you have above and below ground. So then you add those up and you essentially see, like, if something's in a really critical condition and it's a major hazard, you have a 7, let's just say, that that's going to become a top priority. Next slide. And so the first step was to, within the environment, within the infrastructure and energy systems, and within your campus community, This was how we laid it out to understand the higher numbers were tree canopy for us, campus agriculture lands and gardens. And then we did this for each of those three categories. But then we took it a step further. Next slide. Really started to get into the confidence of the science in terms of scenarios, and something different about resilience planning that is not a hazardous, like today's hazardous planning, is the difference between a shock and a stress. And so we really teased out some of these shocks and stresses. What's the difference? I always say, like, okay, we're gonna get like 2 days above 100 degrees here in Minneapolis, but we're also going to have a lot more days at like 90, 95, and that's more of a stress. So like we can have these protocols in place for 100 plus, but really the stress and strain on especially our outdoor and our dining facilities in these high heat degree days really needs to be acknowledged as well. So we brought everyone back into the room and we had these like beautiful triangles and we tore them apart. And we really started to like base it on these scenarios, like how would these different systems, how would these different assets react? And that gave us a true indicator of what assets we were going to prioritize. And it really gave us a reflection on the low scores as to where our strengths were and built out further pieces of our strength reflections so that we knew where to land as we started the planning. Next slide. And then just so you can like put all this information into one place, we were looking at the bottom left. What are the existing threats that have nothing to do with climate change? Because that's where your condition is at now. We had these sort of like ranges for condition. This was all based on power supply. And then laying out your hazards, and some of them were stress and shocks. So that's what's in gray. And then what's the impact? And as you can see with power supply, of course, it's increased demand. You're going to have with the power going out more, you have flooding issues, or we did, ability to obtain fuel under these circumstances. And then essentially that's the impact, and you are trying to reach an ideal state. Next slide. And that's what planning is. It's simply that gap between what you expect, and now you have a group of stakeholders that fully understand these hazards and have had a conversation with the assets they know best and where you want to be. It sounds so simple, but once you start having those priorities, the planning gets a lot easier. And that's why you see it as a shorter piece of our entire timeline of an entire climate action plan. Next slide. And so in thinking in terms of outcomes and duration for both universities, they both had a vision, they both have a target. It's very interesting to think about targets in terms of resilience because it's not as simple as like the 2050 science-based target for mitigation. So you have to bring a lot more nuance to that. What we did at University of Minnesota is give a goal for the environment section, the infrastructure and energy systems in the campus community so that every asset didn't need its own goal and it's more clearly laid out. We then went another step deeper that is really challenging, but I would encourage to push you is come up with objectives for those assets that are measurable. And what are the indicators and how are you going to measure success of resilience? You can do this by saying, hey, how did we literally weather the storm? That's another way of doing it with more community output. But here's a way to get the measurable concepts and strategies into your plan and then detailing the strategies. Whereas at UW-Milwaukee, our priorities really showed up in, I think it was 6 catalytic projects over 5 years that we would then reflect and focus. And I'm happy to say that that work is still continuing back at UW-Milwaukee on a 5-year cycle versus the 10-year cycle with the climate action plan here at the University of Minnesota. Next slide. And something I just want to really touch on that matters to starting a plan, getting people to the table, and then ultimately implementing, which is where we're at here. It's a different resonance with different communities. The thing I'm actually going to stress the most, this opens up the door to having real conversations that matter to your community. They're facing every day. They've already made adjustments for high heat days and bad air quality from forest fires. And you're finally, I think, finding new ways to bring equity to the table and lead with equity. Our plan here really focuses on the public health of vulnerable communities and essential workers. And I say essential very clearly because those are the staff who have to come to campus, they have to commute, they can only do their work here, and they by far are more exposed to the hazards. Not to mention they are typically the lower paid individuals on your campus and have to drive further to be able to afford housing. So we've got an exacerbation. And I should note also, we did some analysis of the overlap and the conflict of mitigation and adaptation. You'll see that in our resilience plan. But this is a different conversation for leadership too. And what's kind of great about it, if you get, as you move through this, these are a lot of policy changes. This is a lot of new information sharing. This isn't always about cost. And I did have my boss say to me, I didn't know we needed a resilience plan until you did one. And so I think that it's still a fuzzy term. We think about, we say the word resilience a lot. We have to stick in this space to climate resilience. If you want to get the work done, if we talked about all resilience, you would be struggling. That was something early on in my career with this that I had a hard time working through. But leadership will respond because this isn't all about the $100 million ticket. There's a lot of work that can be done with virtually nothing except for capacity. So it's just, I want you to know that the buy-in is different and I think far more inclusive when you do climate resilience planning. And that's what I have.
Okay, Adam, I'm going to ask you to come back on camera. And while folks are maybe, thank you, Kate. That was really interesting. And I think I do have a question about the shock versus the stress, but we'll start with some of maybe the registration questions that people had. And while others are maybe getting their brain moving of questions that they might have for you from your presentations. But one of the questions that we had was, I feel like the $1 million question, and maybe one way is more than one way. More than one way is potential funding opportunities for resilience planning. What does that look like, and how are you funding this resilience plan moving forward?
So it actually partially comes down to very different buckets. When I was in Wisconsin, there was a state hazard mitigation office, and they were looking for communities that had resilience plans. They were sort of turning their attention from the traditional hazard mitigation. And so we then qualified for new funding that didn't exist, that our state hazard mitigation office was funneling from the federal government. And this is previous to IRA dollars and so forth. And as grants are rolling out and so forth, there's very different grants for resilience. And it all depends on your assets. It depends on what are you trying to achieve. One thing here that's really unique is that the Mississippi River runs through our campus. It is the only natural gorge of the entire Mississippi. It naturally erodes. So we had to really think about how do we measure erosion and understand things in a natural system that is tearing down our roads and impacting our stormwater infrastructure. And so there's very different dollars through your Department of Natural Resources and so forth that can be applied for. In terms of the buildings, which are going to be where you'll see the conflict of dollars, or like you think there's a conflict, there's actually a great alignment with if you are working to insulate from rain penetration, flooding, and so forth, you're probably doing something really great for energy efficiency. So thinking clearly about your goals and where they're in conflict and where they're aligning, you actually probably have more aligning than you realize. And you can, as I would say, 3 birds, 1 stone, really achieve some major benefits.
Great, thank you. And then one for you, Adam. This kind of came up a little bit in our planning call about balancing the cost of mitigation and adaptation. When and how do you set those priorities? And then really how I would also add on to that is what is an avenue into working with municipalities? So where should you start working, and with who should you start building those relationships? So kind of a 2-part question.
Okay. The cost to mitigate, balancing the cost of mitigation and adaptation, I probably would leave that to Kate, given
Okay.
your background. But in terms of initiating, starting, enhancing, continuing types of relationship with municipality, um, it really depends on where you're at. I've worked with campuses that were new to planning for resilience and really wanted to focus in on figuring out their playbook uh, versus bringing in outside partners such as municipalities or counties and really figuring themselves out before going bigger and broader. In one hand, to really know what you need to do to realize that more resilient, more sustainable, more equitable future on your campus, but then also to be a more viable partner for the municipality and external partners once you've figured out what you need to do. Um, but I've also seen it the other way where municipalities tend to get out in front and come up with a whole wonderful plan for climate action, but somehow forgotten the incredible strength, intellectual facilities, refrigeration services, food, shelter, all those really key things that are critical during emergency situations that campuses often have and can be available if they're included in those larger planning processes. But again, it kind of gets to parity too. In that Eastern Connecticut State University I mentioned, they were roughly the equivalent size of the town of Wyndham, their encompassing municipality. So it was to their best interest to work directly together. Whereas a downtown Tufts campus in Boston obviously doesn't rival the size of the city, but nonetheless, it really advantages everybody to be thinking more broadly about your partnerships when it comes to resilience, sustainability, et cetera. But sometimes you just need to get your ducks in a row first before you can be a real viable partner with your surrounding municipalities and counties. And hopefully, your surrounding municipalities and counties are already thinking about you as an asset, if I may, Kate, um, and are just waiting for you to say, "Hey, listen, we want to do some resilience planning on campus. Can we sit down and talk about this?" And I suspect you'll find a pretty ready partner, but typically start with planning department in the municipality. Engineering is always a good connection. I wouldn't be surprised if your emergency management professionals are already connected with the surrounding municipalities, and then public works departments, planning, engineering, emergency management. It's typically fire, but sometimes there's standalone emergency management professionals, and public works are fantastic ways to connect because you're all in the same business effectively, and you're always looking for ways to leverage limited time, energy, and dollars.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we also talked about that a little bit, Kate, with your difference of in Milwaukee versus Minnesota in terms of the Minnesota being a city, and it was a little bit more difficult to work with them because you are one of many campuses versus UW Milwaukee. You're one of few. But I'll pass it over to
It
you.
really came down to, I was new here. I'm still like figuring out so much. It was just like, where do I even begin? Whereas like we all know this, change moves at the speed of trust. And I had a fantastic working relationship with our sewage district, with our city. I mean, that's a whole nother story. I value that so much and how it supported my work at UWM as I'm like carving that out now. And we're getting somewhere, but it's just so different when you're new. Yeah.
That is awesome, Kate. Change moves at the speed of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
It's Stephanie, I had a question in the chat. Can you speak to getting buy-in for the assessment process? What does that look like?
Um, I I found it really easy, I guess, because the folks I brought along the way I brought them through the whole thing. And to this point now, we actually have the first strategy for public health of vulnerable populations as our asset category. The first strategy is to build a task force so that we could convene the knowledge of all the communities we were speaking to and of. So what is that? Not for us, without us. I'm not saying that one right. Got all these little sayings in my head. And so like they've been a part of the whole process and now they're helping do the implementation. So that really worked. And I think something that really has been a leading factor in both communities is health. Resilience really comes down to our health in the community, whether it be pollution or um, vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, all these other things that are coming out of climate change. I think health was really the factor that brought a lot of people to the table. And that's essentially what we put as a high value as an outcome of a resilient community. And then I guess I go back into Milwaukee, like bringing stakeholders to the table had a lot more to do with the trust I have been building up with a variety of communities from the beginning. And it was like, hey, I got something that this is what it is. What do you think of it? How does this move your work forward? I think I do that a lot in sustainability. Like, how does this, like, what do you need to get out of this? And then being truthful to that and moving forward with that.
Yeah, I think that could be a really great connection with the emergency response team specifically, that could be a individual first key partner. Adam, anything to add on to that?
No, I'm just perpetually impressed and amazed at a lot of the informal connections that communities have. In this case, potentially a campus and a municipality. There's a lot of, there's trainings, sometimes there's mutual aid agreements, things like that that are rather formal. But oftentimes there are a lot of informal connections between staff and municipalities and campus that are already in place. It's amazing once you start looking how many connections that can be built upon are already there. It's just something to be aware of. It's there may be ground that is already been worn a little bit that can be amplified and built upon.
Thanks, Adam. Another question we had was, how can we ensure that marginalized groups within the university ecosystem are actively involved in resilience planning? And so, Kate, I'll pass it to you first and then to you, Adam.
I think I hear a lot of that in that question, how I answered the last one, but ensuring that you are meeting their goals and their needs. And I actually like kind of paused when I got here because I didn't see enough of the like a true marginalized community, campus community represented in our work group. And I was not, I could not move forward without that work having been done. And I spent a good deal, and it sounds terrible to say this, but within 2 months, I was meeting and understanding our food security. I was understanding how our health systems work here for students. The different, a large campus has so many different entities. We actually have a response management for students and so forth. So I wouldn't call it scrambling, but I put a lot of time and attention into bringing people to the table and understanding some groups as fast as I could in a new community, and invite them to the space. And really being, I think this comes through in how you deliver, is like, how much are you really letting the campus community have a voice in what your actual strategies are? Are you truly listening and putting pen to paper with what those voices? And if you are doing that, they come to one meeting and they'll come to the next meeting and they'll come to the next meeting. So I would not have expected communities to always have the time for this, but if you're being true and putting their words on paper and committing to it, then they stay and they now are helping with implementation.
Yeah, I just add to that, this words like intentional and patience come to mind. And, even if it messes with your timeline in terms of we've got to get this thing done by in 18 months and our
Mhm.
comp plan is due and all this stuff. Well, it's more it's more important to go slowly and ensure that you're at least providing folks of your community with an opportunity to contribute in ways that they feel comfortable contributing is really important. And oftentimes it starts way back at the beginning. So, how do you define your community? And really making sure that you're capturing the voices of, one of the groups that often gets left out of these planning processes is actually the customer, the student. And making sure that the student is sitting next to the chancellor or the president or somebody in that's higher, leadership, and that voice is being shared. So, intentional, patient, slowing down to accommodate those voices. It's much more important to go slowly to go along and really create the campus that is exceptional, and there's some value to leadership. This is not a topic that's going to go away. So from a pure marketing perspective, if you do all those right things and you take all those right steps in an intentional and a patient way, you're going to potentially create a competitive advantage, if you will, from a marketing and educational kind of perspective. So to leadership, it's in your best interest to make sure that all voices are provided an opportunity to voice and be part of those outcomes in a meaningful, genuine type of way.
I couldn't agree with that more. I had to push back on that a lot here because they had a timeline in mind that I stepped into being new. And often, okay, we need another survey. Okay, we're gonna do two open houses. We're gonna go to multiple campuses. We're gonna go to different times of day, like stretching it. And then one point where I really firmly kind of dug my heels in was that when we had a draft plan that the work group was pretty comfortable with, I did 12 focus groups, 3 of which were purely students, to see which areas they had the most concern for and what their feedback was. And that was late nights, early mornings, lunch hours, like going out into the community. And I wish I could have done 50 focus groups, but we worked really hard to get departments and student orgs and so forth to host us that weren't all in the traditional sustainability spaces. So now that we slowed down there, we can move fast in our implementation because they were their words and they're already on board and they know what we're doing and we're like ready to go together. So in order to go fast, go slow and think about direction versus speed.
Yeah, there is something that, if I may, it's an interesting situation because many of your students are transient in the sense that it's 2 years, 4 years, and then another cohort comes in. But there's something so powerful about that origin story, sitting around the fireplace, coming up with these actions. And I was there, I remember it. Uh, you know, Change moves at the speed of trust. Well, I trust it, so let's get going. You know what I mean? So there's something really powerful about that, but yet it's in the context of a somewhat transient population. So it's a bit of a bit of a tricky situation, but certainly a lot of wealth digging in.
Yeah, and also not something that we can cover all the way in 1 hour, right? So well, thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And if you guys want to drop your emails in the chat real quick, I think that would be really helpful for folks. And yeah, we'll be sending out the recording either by the end of the week or early next week, and we will also include the evaluation in there, and that is always really helpful to understand a little bit more about what made sense for everybody and where we need to dig a little bit deeper. So thank you again, and yeah, have a great evening, and we'll see everybody soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.